Good morning, everybody. It's Monday. It's 8:30 on the West Coast of Americas. That must mean it's time for Sharon Ayers. Yay! Good morning, Sharon. How are you?
Good morning.
Okay, I have a little too much energy this morning.
That's great. I like that.
Well, yes, it's been an interesting ride. So today, funerals. Sharon has put together this huge list of amazing topics that we can talk about, and I was kind of looking around for one today, and funerals just leapt out at me because music is such a huge part of, certainly part of my experience of funerals. But before we get into the music thing, let's get it back into the overall grief. I mean, funerals are a tough one, aren't they?
They are tough, but I think in a lot of ways they're the opportunity that we have. And we talked a little bit about this last week about celebrity grief, is that you can grieve in community. And there's something so healing with being able to share your emotions and cry and remember your loved one or remember somebody else's loved one when you're with a group of people. And that's why, funerals, memorial services, whatever, are so healing. It's important for not only for the family, but for those who know the family to be able to get those emotions and go through those emotions together with other people.
It really is. I mean, I guess my most recent one was my dad 3 years back, and there are so many ways you can do this,
right?
And so many different, approaches. And there's the religious side and non-religious side, and I mean, but really, it's the idea of the funeral, as you say. It's the idea of having all the human beings come together to acknowledge that someone has gone.
Right. And then share their grief and those emotions, which typically we aren't allowed to share because people don't want to be crying in public. I mean, it actually gives you permission to cry and be emotional in public. And I think part of the reason we do that is because it is so healing. Otherwise, people just kind of stuff those emotions down and keep going. And as you know, we've talked about this for a long time, that's just not healthy. So I think that opens the door for those emotions to come out. When we're with other people.
It was really interesting, though. I mean, I've been looking at the grief world for quite a long time now, not as long as you. But you'd think that something as obvious as crying in public is good for you. You'd think that would be more visible.
Yeah, you would.
Because, again, over the last 2 weeks, and the whole crying in public, and the insight on last week on the celebrity one, that you're crying together, it's just the idea of actually crying in public selflessly makes you feel better. Why isn't that more spread out in the world?
Well, I think the biggest problem is, and this is especially with grief and especially for us who live in LA, is it's really about receiving approval from other people, right? We don't want to be judged, analyzed, or criticized, and we really want to be accepted. So if we do something that people think is not normal, like crying in public, then we are judged, analyzed, and criticized, and then we shut down, right? So I think the part of grieving in a funeral or memorial service gives us the opportunity to not be judged, criticized, and analyzed because it's a sanctioned, appropriate place to grieve. And so people just bring their walls down. You'd think we would do it more often, but we just seem to relegate it only to memorial services and funerals, when in reality, we should be able to do it with everything. But at least that's a good starting point for people who are experiencing a major loss to be able to feel. And, some people can't cry at a funeral. I mean, and that's okay too. But I think for a lot of people, it just opens the floodgates. Otherwise, they'd be hiding in their bedroom or they'd be, stuffing it down.
Right. I remember the first funeral I went with my grandfather. I didn't feel anything. I thought I was a bit of a psychopath because everybody else was crying and I couldn't. And I was like, this is kind of odd. I'm supposed to be feeling something. But
well, and I think it's okay not to feel. I mean, everybody's different, right? I mean, I've been to funerals where I didn't have that sort of intense relationship with somebody. I'm there because it's a sister or brother of somebody else or whatever. And you go, to show you, to give your respects, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're emotional about the death. Right. And that's okay.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, there's always, look, I come from a Scottish family, and yes, you have the funeral and everybody turns up and there's the service or, whatever. But then it's what my mother calls the bun fight, is that after that, everybody goes back, and whether it's in a hotel or in somebody's house, and everybody gets fairly shit-faced, basically. But that's such a cathartic thing as well, because then it's, yes, you've done the sad crying bit, but now it's the positive memory of them. And there's something really positive about that.
Absolutely. And to be able to talk about that person and share stories and maybe tell jokes and maybe, talk about their embarrassing moments, it's very healing. And that's one of the things that gets us and moves us through our grief, is sharing our memories and talking about our loved ones. And a lot of times we shut that down because we don't want to put our grief onto other people. But in reality, being able to share the story or say their name, I do that about my dad all the time. If my dad was here, I tell people, God, if my dad was here, he would love this. Or I remember the time when, yesterday we were walking with our grief group, and my dad used to watch clouds when he was in the Navy, because they'd lay on the ships for so long. And, there was a cloud up there. And I'm thinking, if my dad was here, my dad would see some shape in that cloud. And I just paused and I remembered him and shared it with the group. And then everybody else started talking about what they saw in the clouds. And so it was a nice way to remember him, even though he wasn't there. So I think it's very healing, even if that means we eat and have a few drinks and whatever, is to share those stories.
It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. So bringing it in, because we talked about, how my dad was super, his planning for his own death. He had his own death file and everything was in there, and the poems and the music that he wanted. But it's funny, do you know what music you want at your funeral?
Now that you say this, I do have a death file like your dad. I just went to a class called Conscious Dying, and it's really about, being cognizant and preparing for those moments in your life, right, at the end of life. And so I had already done this. I think because I have kids, I've always been paranoid about being prepared. So I do have music. I have Pink, Raise Your Glass. That's in my memorial service somewhere. I know it. I don't know whether it'll be at church or at a beach or, at the whatever reception, but Pink, Raise Your Glass is like one of my memorial service top 5. So I've thought about the music. How about you?
Well, it's interesting because there's so many different types of music, and it's, how many songs do you have? 2 or 3 songs. You got the song that's playing when people walks in, and that's often classical and foreboding, or solemn or whatever. Maybe not solemn, but then you've got like the song in the middle for reflection, then the song at the end. My cousin who died young last year, we all walked out to Lynyrd Skynyrd's Freebird, which is a brilliant song to end with. My dad had Foray's Requiem coming in, but the song that emotionally devastated my mother was Louis Armstrong's Wonderful World. Oh. And that apparently is a big favorite for funerals, because it's that expression of life is pretty good and life is awesome, and even though they're not there, that I like that. I'm not sure. I'm hoping not to pass on too soon, but I will be putting some more thought into it.
Yeah, it's important, and it's important to think about. It's also important to think that maybe you want to have, I've been reading a lot about, we talked in our class about having a living funeral, meaning that you don't have a funeral after you die, you have it before you die. And so that way you can really actually say goodbye to people. If you have a prolonged deal, obviously if it's something that's a quick death, that wouldn't work. But if or you have a terminal illness, it's a way of being able, and then you could make it more of a joyous celebration rather than something that's, all the sad music. It could be, all of the Pink songs instead of, all of the sad songs.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's like a playlist. You paint an emotional journey with the music, and I think the solemn opening is kind of cool. I think having a poignant, track in the middle, but then, leaving with, I was chatting with Wendy, my wife, and she wants Rick James, She's a Brick House, to be her.
I love that. I like her personality. That's great. That's great.
But yeah, it's the role of music in this whole thing that acts as a palliative, that acts as a vessel, that acts as a catalyst to hopefully, get you to a point where the grief is mitigated and you're feeling a wee bit better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right, so the track this week is indeed Louis Armstrong's Wonderful World. So that will be, I think that's above us. Sharon and I will be back next week. It was a short one this week because I think we were very lucky and I was hearing things happening. So anything happening with Grief Reiki this week, Sharon?
We have our Grief and Healing Corner tomorrow, which is our Facebook Live at 1:30 Pacific time. And I'll be interviewing Rochelle Jones from Grief Recovery with Rochelle. So she does similar work to me. So it'll be kind of fun to talk to her. She's here in California as well. So that's what's going on.
If you send us a link, we'll just stick the link to Rochelle down below too.
Thank you.
All right. You are welcome. Have a fabulous week. I will see you next week. And, we'll probably swap email in between then. All righty, peoples. Have a great week.